Optimism amidst social anxiety. Picture the following scenario. You're at a party with your friend, and there is some big news that you really wanted to share with him, to the point where you even memorized exactly how you are going to bring the subject up. Then, while you're sitting up to reveal these big news, your friend just picks up his phone and starts texting someone else. How do you react? Do you A. Give up on giving the big news because you are clearly bothering your friend with details about your boring life? Or wait for him to finish texting and try breaking the big news again? This may seem like a trivial matter at first, but picking option A tends to be a clear sign of social anxiety, and it is highly tied with whether you approach relationships from an optimistic or pessimistic lens. And according to the American psychologist Martin Seligman, this pessimistic outlook on life might be part of the reason why you're socially anxious in the first place. Let's look at the situation with your friend once again. If you picked option A, you are more likely to ascribe the reason for your friend's distraction on yourself. I'm not interesting enough. They only listen to me out of politeness. My news weren't that exciting. You believe that if your friend wouldn't listen to you, it might be your fault, and that no one would ever be interested in what you had to say, which has to do with how you tend to explain most social situations. Seligman analyzed that pessimists and optimists tend to have different explanatory styles, which he divided into 3 P's. Permanence. Optimists tend to attribute temporary causes to setbacks in their life, like getting rejected by a romantic partner, and are able to bounce back from such events much easier. A pessimist, on the other hand, will believe that he was rejected because of their height or the tone of their voice, and that therefore every partner will reject them for the same reason. Persuasiveness. An optimist is also more likely to compartmentalize negative events, so if they get bad grades in a specific class, they tend to look at that as a single problem that won't really impact his familial life or his future as a professional. But a pessimist will believe that failing at a class means that his family will like him less, and that they're bound to fail at getting into prestigious colleges and therefore getting a job as a result. Personalization. Likewise, an optimist is likely less to attribute the cause of negative events to themselves. If they get fired from their job, it will be the fault of this rotten economy, not of his actions. Now, if a pessimist gets fired, it could be because he sucks at what he does, and that he picked a wrong career path for his life. Learned helplessness. Looking at these explanatory styles, it's not hard to notice how pessimistic lines of thought that often find no echo in reality are a big part of social anxiety. And Seligman noticed this as well during an experiment involving 3 groups of dogs. In this experiment, the first set of dogs worked as a control group, while the second was put in an environment with an electric grid which would dispense shocks at random, which the dogs could turn off by pressing a button. The third, however, was put in a similar environment to the second, but without the possibility of escaping the pain of the shocks, which would end just as randomly as when they started. As you can imagine, the puppies on the third group soon started feeling the effects of being put in a painful situation which they had no control over. On the second stage of the experiment, both groups were put on a new environment where they would be able to escape the shocks, but where the puppies from the second group would just replicate the solution they had learned. Those in the third group would just stay there and accept the pain of the shocks, even though the solution was right in front of them. In a sense, the puppies on the third group had developed a form of learned helplessness, adopting the pessimistic view that they shouldn't bother pressing the button because it wouldn't do anything. But when Seligman taught them that they could now end the shocks by pressing the button, they started doing it every time, which led the psychiatrist to believe that optimism could be learned like any skill. Optimism can be learned. Right now you might be cursing at the screen saying something like, well, what the hell does that have to do with me? I'm not a dog, and my social anxiety is not like an electric shock that I can just press a button to solve. And you would be absolutely right. However, most cases of social anxiety do come from the same feeling of helplessness, which we have learned is something we acquire somewhere in our development. Maybe you witnessed or even suffered abuse in your home as a child, or were exposed to bullying from a very young age, or even had to deal with loss or the desertion of a loved one, and that has led you to adopt a certain set of pessimistic beliefs about people in general. After all, if you believe that most people are disinterested or even hostile to you from the get-go, you're less likely to try and form meaningful relationships with them, which will obviously take its toll on your overall quality of life. Social anxiety is also going to negatively affect your professional life as well, since doing things like job interviews and networking becomes significantly harder when you believe everyone is going to judge you negatively. So how can we teach ourselves to become more optimistic? Learning optimism. In order to help his patients develop a more optimistic outlook by challenging their pessimistic thoughts, Seligman devised that he called the ABCDE model, standing for adversity. Can you track one recent event at a source of your pessimistic thoughts? Belief. How did this event make you feel? Consequence. Do you notice any behaviors or habits that arose as a consequence of your feelings towards the event? Disputation. Are there any events that prove your feelings about the source event wrong? Energization. How does challenging your negative beliefs inspire you to move forward with new beliefs? Let's look at some examples. As a socially anxious person, you believe that no matter how hard you try, you're never going to express yourself the way you wanted to. Adversity. Following the ABCDE model, you remember that you felt like that after being punished by a teacher for something you didn't do. Belief. Because you were unable to explain your point of view then, you started believing that you're simply incapable of explaining your thoughts to others. After all, if your teacher didn't listen to you, why would anyone? Consequence. Because you started believing that people would simply not listen to you when you tried explaining your thoughts, you simply gave up altogether, fearing what would happen if you tried too hard. Disputation. However, you notice that you are better at expressing yourselves with friends and family, so you are clearly capable of putting your thoughts into words. Energy. And this realization makes you commit to speaking your mind more often. By applying this method, you will start building the basis of a strong self-confidence that has a healthy sense of scale and realism on how you see the world at its core, and you will be happier for it. This YouTube channel is dedicated to improving people's lives through the proliferation of psychological knowledge and education. You can aid on this mission by liking and sharing this video, as well as subscribing and ringing the notification bell for more content in the near future.